Hello everyone, how are you all doing? So today we are gonna see, what if Naruto x Yugito, part 5, hope you enjoy the video, let's start the video. The street an 8-year-old Naruto was walking on seemed all too quiet. Not that he minded that at all. But he would wish if everyone just didn't back away from him in fear as soon as they saw him. It was quite annoying for him to be feared this much. He hadn't killed anyone in a month and that was self-defense. He knew why they feared him of course, but to this proportion was ludicrous. It wasn't like he was going to lash out and attack them at any given second, though the thought of it seemed justified at times. Shaking that thought off his head, he headed towards his favorite place to eat. Even over the past 2 years of training, the academy really hadn't changed him all too much. Sure, he was more bloodthirsty thanks to Anko, but how could he not be after spending 2 years with her? His attire was really the only thing to change than his height, which was 4 foot 3 inches. He wore a dark black under armor, short-sleeved shirt, and a red vest with the Uzumaki spiral on the back and armored plating inside to give mild protection for kunai and shuriken over his shirt. He had a katana strapped to his back as the blade was still too large for him to put at his side. His pants were pitch black with a thin crimson strip on the outside of each pant leg. He had on black combat boots with a red heel and had his pants tucked into them. And finally, strapped on his head was a hit I-80 he had received yesterday for graduation. As he walked into the ramen stand, Tucci looked up and smiled at him before nodding a bit. The usual Naruto. Naruto nodded as he sat down on his regular stool and smiled slightly at him, mainly because he was one of the few people he could trust. A few minutes later, Tucci came back from the back and placed 3 bowls in front of Naruto. Naruto nodded a bit and gave him a very faint smile in gratitude before he slowly began eating the miso-flavored ramen. A few minutes later, he had started on his 3rd bowl when someone entered the stand. Naruto's eyes instantly gazed back to see if the new person was a threat, only to see the one-eyed pervert reading his book as he sat beside Naruto. One chicken-flavored Tucci. And Naruto, shouldn't you be heading to the academy for your team placement? Kakashi spoke in a monotone voice as his eyes never left his precious book. Naruto twitched in annoyance at this but shook his head as he continued eating for a bit. What's the point? I know I'm the rookie of the year so they'll be putting me on the squad with the topper second Kunoichi and the person who finished dead last of the graduating group. Kakashi tilted as a bit in agreement as he continued reading. True, but there were only 26 people that were in your class and, as much as I hate to say it, they would rather put you with a more experienced genin team than with just a bunch of academy students that probably won't make it on their first real mission. And because most of their parents would throw a fit if they learned that you were on their child's team. Eating his ramen again, Naruto thought about it and nodded a bit, having the same thought as Kakashi did. Shaking his head, he finished up his last bowl of ramen and placed his Ryo on the counter, making sure to give Tucci a tip. He stood up and stretched as Kakashi spoke once again as he put up his book as Tucci glared at him, seeing that AM was in the stand. So, I heard Yugito just made it. Naruto nodded as he stretched some more before turning back to the mask. Yeah. She came in last night and both her, Anko, and I celebrated. Though I went home early, not wanting to be too late for my exam and because they were saying really strange things. Kakashi raised his eyebrow at that part as he swallowed the ramen in his mouth, somehow not showing his mask to the ire of all 3 that were there. Strange things. Like what? Shrugging, Naruto turned around. I really didn't understand much of it, but I think it dealt with the birds and bees speech Anko gave me a while back. Sputtering was heard as Kakashi choked on his ramen. Taking the opportunity, Naruto appeared in front of him and moved the mask to take a peek and shook his head. So that's what's behind your mask. And here I was thinking you were deformed under there. Well, Jana Kakashi-sensei. But that said, he quickly left the stand with a grin on his face, leaving a disgruntled Kakashi as he had been tricked by an 8-year-old. A few minutes later, Naruto found himself walking into the academy. He ignored the frightened look on all the students rushing away from him and the glares from a few of the teachers. Though he was grateful that a few of them held him in high regard. Even one went out to befriend him. Mainly the one that had just become a teacher and was named after a dolphin. Shaking his head on that, Naruto walked by all of them and was greeted by Iruka as he was walking to his class after lunch. Hey Naruto. Naruto up at him and nodded a bit, seeing his class was behind. He noticed the glare from the other teacher but ignored it as he really didn't care. Hello Iruka-san. Don't have much time to talk. I have a few minutes to get to my team assignments. Iruka nodded in understanding and waved him off. Alright then. I have a class anyways. Though I want to hear whose team you end up on. Nodding a bit, Naruto walked by him and his class, getting a glare from some of them, a blushing Hyuga air, a stare from an Inuzuka seeing the Hyuga's blush, and a few stunned looks from an Uchiha and his 2 frantic fangirls. Shaking his head off that, he headed towards his room so he didn't have to deal with the eventual question they would ask. Iruka shook his head at Naruto with a slight smile on his face and was about to turn around when Sasuke spoke up. "Iruka-sensei. Who was that?" Sighing a bit, wondering if Naruto had left him just to answer their question, he turned to the class. "That would be Uzumaki Matrashi Naruto. He's this year's Rookie of the Year. Now come to class, otherwise I'm going to keep you all after class." They all nodded enthusiastically, not wanting that to happen. Sasuke placed his hand on his chin as he looked at the back of the said boy. "He can't be older than me, so what makes him different? Is he a genius?" Shaking that thought, he turned back around and followed his class, ignoring both Ino and Sakura's constant chatting on who was going to sit beside him. He honestly had to begin to wonder if his family was cursed, as it seemed that every male member of the clan had to deal with fangirls throughout their entire life. In the Hokage's tower, 9 Ana were surrounding the crystal ball as the Sandaime activated it. The notable few of the group were Akimichi Chauza, Jeku Hate, and of course Hada Kakashi, though everyone in the room knew he was going to fail his team this year unless Naruto happened to be on it. Shaking his head, Sarutobi noticed Naruto walking into the room before turning to the 9. "Alright, all of you that are here to choose your students. I know that we normally do the Rookie of the Year, Top Kunoichi, and Dead Last setup, but this year we have 26 potential, so there will be 2 left over. And Hate, you have lost 2 of your students to the last in Kusagakure, so you will need 2 to fill in the slots. That's why you will be allowed to pick first." The others nodded as Hate sighed a bit at his failure for the 2 before walking over to the crystal ball as he gazed over it while reading the records on each potential. After looking through most of them, he refrained from sighing. None of them would make the cut. Hana would eat them alive, and the fact that he really didn't want to have 2 inexperienced children joining his team. Sighing a bit, he looked over and noticed Naruto sitting down beside himself, though that didn't last long, as a young girl with raven-colored hairs and onyx-colored eyes sat at the other end of the row. He instantly recognized her by her features alone, as an Uchiha. But that wasn't what caught his interest, it was Naruto. From what he heard from Yugao, he was very capable and, unlike her, wished to use a style that relied on attack instead of defense. And from the katana on his back, he could deduce that he was serious about being a shinobi, unlike the majority of the graduating class. Judging him from what Yugao had told, he knew that he happened to be quiet to those he didn't know or trust. A trait Hana would find irritating, as she was pretty vocal herself, but both Tsume and he had worked on. But also when people had gained his trust, he would go out of his way to protect him, showing that some of his old self still remained. He also knew he was quite skilled and knew he wouldn't have to worry about him, and if a situation became too dangerous, he could call on Kyuubi. The thought disturbed him a bit, but he was and he knew they would have to call upon their tenant eventually. Shaking that thought, he knew who his first pick was, now he just needed to find one more to fill up his team. His eyes landed on the Uchiha girl that had just entered the class today, as she had graduated early. From her file, she was fairly gifted as she had activated her Sharingan and had 3 Tomo in her right eye and 1 in her left. But the interesting thing was that she didn't activate her Sharingan until a few days ago, and she had already been told that they were going to let her take the exam early. Looking over her personality records, his eyes widened in shock. It was an oddity of nature when an Uchiha, especially a head family Uchiha, was outgoing and friendly with others. Though she was the same as Naruto, as she was quiet around people she didn't know. Looking over, he noticed that she did show a bit of the Uchiha arrogance, as noted in her records, but she also had something that most didn't. He could see in her eyes that she had a drive to improve, not for her clan, but for herself. Smirking a bit, not caring that the others were going to hate him for doing this, though some would thank him for taking the demon out of the mix. He gritted his teeth lightly at the thought before shaking his head. "I've made my decision, Hokage-sama." Sarutobi nodded, as he had seen his grave and had to refrain from smirking before motioning Hei to speak. "I don't think he realizes it, but he's remaking the same team their parents had. I have decided to take Uzumaki Midarashi Naruto and Uchiha Maiko." At this, a few of them started speaking up about who it was unfair that he got the Uchiha, and one of them even said that it wasn't fair that he got the best 2 and wanted her or both of them on their teams. Kakashi smirked at Hei before pulling out his orange book and began reading, no longer having to worry about passing his team this year. Sarutobi sighed in annoyance at the "I am afraid none of you have the authority to overrule my decision, so Uchiha Maiko and Uzumaki Midarashi Naruto will join Jeku Hate and Inyazaku Hana." As many of them looked dissatisfied by this, 3 smirks were in the room held by none other than Sandaime, Hate, and Kakashi. Naruto sighed mentally as he walked into the room. He could feel practically everyone's eyes on him. He was glad it wasn't mostly fear, but he did dislike the looks of hatred they gave him. Most of them didn't dislike him for being Kyuubi's vessel, but for the fact that he had embarrassed everyone in the class at one point, either by one way or another. There were a few that hated him because their parents did, but he could care less about them as he sat down in his seat at the final row. He ignored the mumbling for the other students before the door opened once more to reveal a girl with raven black hair that reached to the middle of her back, a sleek face, and a decent build, more athletic and tomboy-like than the skinny fangirls in the classroom. She wore a navy blue shirt and white pants, but on the back of her shirt there was an Uchiha fan on the back. Within seconds, guys were on her much to her annoyance and Naruto's amusement. He had actually never seen guys acting like fangirls, so this was a change in pace. The Uchiha girl narrowed her onyx eyes as she glared at them harshly. Of course the guys didn't notice this, she narrowed her eyes as she blurred out of their view and appeared behind them. Naruto raised his eyebrow in surprise at this, but shook his head a bit as he had seen much faster before. Maiko noticed this as she tried to get away from her seemingly never-ending fanboys. She also noted that the room seemed oddly vacant from his side of the room. Wonder as to why this was, she walked towards him and noticed no one else followed her. She raised her eyebrow at this, but shook her head as she actually preferred not to be followed and decided to sit near him. Naruto shook his head as he ignored her, as he really didn't want to have to deal with all the murmuring of the boys growling at him to move so they could come and sit by her. Shaking his head, he sighed deeply as he pulled out his katana and expected it as he waited for Kikyo-sensei to arrive and give them their team assignments. She saw him do this and expected the sharpness with eyes and noticed that it was sharper than even her Aniki's wakizashi. Shaking her head, she laid back in her chair and sighed as she waited for the sensei to arrive. She ignored the starting of the fanboys looking at her assets or glaring at the blonde-haired boy near her. She had half a mind to pull out a kunai and threaten them with castration if they kept staring, but she sighed knowing they wouldn't. Answering both of their prayers, a female entered the room. The entire class instantly became quiet, not wanting to anger their volatile sensei, as she looked somewhat irked. Kikyo shook her head as she stood in front of the class before speaking in an annoyed tone. Alright, as most of you know, 2 of you will be put on a pre-existing team, as the rest will make new ones. Most of you have potential, but unlike here, you will have to work otherwise you will never make it to a dot. Most of the class didn't like this, but shut up when their sensei glared at them heavily. Now then, here are the teams. Team 1 is. Naruto sighed as he turned them out, though noticing that each of the guys groaned when they heard they weren't on the Uchiha girls' team. Shaking his head, he notices Kikyo turn towards him and rolls her eyes. He knew she didn't hate him, just thought him as annoying due to him already knowing everything she had to teach. Uchiha Maiko and Uzumaki Midarashi Naruto. Both of you will be placed on a currently existing team that just lost 2 genins to the exams. Your new sensei told me to send you to training ground 15. Both looked at each other seeing, as they were the only ones not called before nodding a bit. Naruto placed his hands in a very familiar seal, which surprised Kikyo, as Maiko placed her hand on his shoulder before he threw them away. Most of the class jaws unhinged themselves as they hit their desk as Kikyo shook her, as she should have known he would have learned it by now. Height sighed as he looked over at the crestfallen Hana. He knew she took the deaths of her teammates hard, but there was nothing she could do. Even Height himself didn't realize that Iwa had one of their own. He sighed deeply as he stood beside her as she sat on a training post with her 3 dogs below her, being unusually quiet. Hana looked up at her sensei a bit before back down to her partners as they slept beneath her. She didn't know what to think. After seeing the Iwa go on a rampage on her team and kill her teammates, she didn't know what to do anymore. She wanted to take up after mother, but now she didn't want to resort to violence. It wasn't that she was afraid of fighting, but more of blood being spilled needlessly. She sighed a bit more, speaking softly. Height sensei. Aye. Height shook his head a bit and sighed, knowing what she was thinking. She was having doubts on being a shinobi and endangering her new teammates. Hana. It is alright. There was nothing that could have been done, even if I was there. So let it go. Things like that will happen, it was unfortunate that it had to happen to you so early. Hana nodded a bit as looked down as she petted one of her partner's heads with her feet. Height smiled a bit at her before rubbing her back a bit. And don't worry about your new teammates. They will be fine. Hana looked up at him a bit before smiling lightly before turning around as her trio of dogs began barking loudly as the leaves around picked up and swirled heavily around 2 figures, one with blonde hair, the other with raven. Height was mentally surprised to see a genin, scratch that, a kid just out of the academy that was no older than 8 using a technique as difficult as. Shaking his head, he instantly noticed something off about Naruto before sending another presence in the forest. Height had to refrain from smirking as he had barely caught it himself. Naruto had managed to make it Tsuchi Bunshin of himself and switched it with him during the swirling leaves. He was thinking of testing their skills, but as of now, Naruto was impressing him beyond what he had heard from Yugao and hoped for. But he was going to be damned if he wasn't going to join in on this. So with a quick flick of his wrist, he sliced the clone in half and threw a few shuriken into the forest. Very nice, but I'm not going to let you skip out of this, Naruto. Both girls' eyes widened seeing the Naruto in front of them turn into mud as another Naruto walked out of the tree lines, holding the shuriken in hand. Naruto shook his head slightly, showing he didn't want to be here before he walked towards them and leaned against one of the training posts. Hayate sighed a bit before faking his normal cough, as it was best not to let anyone know he wasn't sick. Now that you are here, we can start by introducing ourselves. Naruto looked up at him and waited for him to start as Maiko sat in the pool between them. Hayate coughed again in reflex as he shook his head a bit. Well, seeing as no one else wants to, I'll start. My name is Jeku Hayate. My likes are practicing my swordsmanship to be on par with that of Kiri no Shichinen Shu and my girlfriend, Yuzuki Yugao. At this, Naruto's eyes perked a bit as he looked at Hayate a bit more seriously. Hayate had to fake another cough to refrain from smirking at Naruto's face, as he knew from Yugao Naruto wished to learn how to use his katana in an offensive manner. My dislikes are people with bad mouths, and Yugao. My dream is to become the best specialist in the world and to marry Yugao once I do. Hana, you're up next. Hana sighed and shook her head at her sensei and his love for Yugao, while Naruto was still slightly interested in him. Sensei, anyone tell you that you have an obsessive personality? Of course this earned him a glare and a cough from Hayate. Shrugging her shoulders, Hana continued. Anyways, my name is Inyazaku Hana. My likes are my partners, friends, and people who treat animals right. My dislikes are people who treat animals poorly and harm my friends. My dream was to follow in my mother's footsteps and take over the clan, but now I'm thinking about becoming a veterinarian. Her 3 dogs looked up at her and barked at her, making her smile lightly. Hayate smiled at her a bit before going through his routine cough before motioning for Maiko to go. The said girl sighed before nodding. My name is Uchiha Maiko. My likes are few and far between, while I dislike people who act like I'm royalty and all the guys that swarm me like moths to a flame. My dream is to remove myself and Sasuke Nai-san from Aniki's shadow. Hayate nodded a bit at her as he understood why. Both she and her younger brother feel inferior to Itachi. Not surprising really seeing that Fugoku has favored him their entire lives. Shaking that thought off, he turned to Naruto. Alright, show off, your turn. Naruto refrained from twitching in annoyance as he settled for his normal stoic appearance. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, I have no likes, I dislike mostly everyone, and my dream is non-existent. Hayate raised his eyebrow at his introduction as both Hana and Maiko looked at him in shock. Maiko looked at him for a brief seconds before a stray thought hit her. Damn. He can give Aniki a run for his money in the emotionless department. Shaking his head, Hayate sighed as he already figured something like this from Naruto as Yugao gave him a heads up as soon as Kakashi told her that he had taken Naruto on his team. Coughing once more, he looked over all 3 of them. Alright then. I would normally give you both a test to see how good you are, but Mr. Showing Off has already given me a glimpse of his abilities, I don't need to worry about him. And Maiko, I'm sure Itachi could give me an accurate account on your abilities, so I have no need to. Anyways, I want all 3 of you here to be here tomorrow at 10 in the morning for our first mission, as a team. All 3 of them nodded in response before he disappeared in a poof of smoke. Sighing a bit, Hana looked over at her 2 new teammates before speaking out to them. How about we go out to get something to eat so we can get to know each other? Maiko looked over at Hana for a few seconds before nodding, as it seemed to be a good idea. Both turned towards Naruto and noticed a swirl of leaves where he used to be, meaning he had gone away. Hana blinked a few times in confusion as Maiko looked angrily at the spot he was at. What's his problem? Hana shrugged as she shook her head a bit. I'm unsure. I've only met him a few times when mother brought him over to interact with both Kiba and myself. From what I remembered, he doesn't let anyone get close to him. Though I have seen and heard some rumors that he has been seen around with a blonde-haired girl around my age. Maiko sighed in annoyance a bit before Hana motioned for her to follow and had an evil glint in her eyes. Well, since he has to be here tomorrow, let's see if my mom can help us get back at him and maybe get him to open up. The young Uchiha grinned not unlike a certain snake as she unconsciously activated her Sharingan. Oh, let's go then. Meanwhile on the Hokage's monument, Naruto was wondering why his nose was itching so much. Hayate appeared in a swirl of leaves in front of Anko, Guy, Kakashi, Sarutobi, Yugao, and Yugito in the Hokage's office. He twitched a bit as he saw Kakashi there. Aren't you supposed to be introducing yourself to your future failed team? Kakashi looked down at his wrist at his imaginary watch and shrugged. Nah. I'm still only an hour late. Have 2 more to go. Everyone in the room sweat dropped at his statement before shaking their heads at the ever-tardy retired Anbu captain. Shaking her head some more, Anko spoke up. So how'd it go? Heiichi sighed deeply as he shook his head. Well, from all I heard about Naruto from Yugao, I wasn't really surprised. Though I didn't try to test his abilities knowing he is more than capable enough from himself and Maiko into the training grounds and within the span of 2, maybe 3 seconds created a Tsuchi Bunshin in the distance and switched himself with it. But I won't be able to truly judge him unless we take a higher mission. Sarutobi sighed deeply before shaking his head. You know I can't give them any more than a D-class mission. I can't afford to give out any C-class missions due to the amount that we get. Everyone looked down at this knowing the reason. Once Kumo learned of the attempted raping of a former Kumo citizen by Konoha shinobi, they used it showed that Konoha shinobi weren't trustworthy and would backstab their clients. They knew this wasn't the truth, but the action of one reflected the whole, and unfortunately it was happening now. Yugito sighed lightly as she looked over to the Hokage monument and noticed Naruto on top of it, scratching his nose. Heiichi nodded in understanding as he looked at the Hokage. Well, they're a new team anyways, they need to get some teamwork under their belts before a C-class mission. Yugao nodded as she walked over to Heiichi and whispered in his ear. Heiichi's eyes widened for a brief second before speaking again. Well, if that's all, I'll be heading out. They gripped Yugao's waist and out of the room, leaving all the males looking confused as both Anko and Yugito instantly understood and smirked a bit. Sarutobi sighed a bit as he had realized it, as well as he had a similar reaction himself before he turned and looked towards Yondame's head and saw Naruto sitting on top of his head. His face fell a bit at the sight. Maybe I should tell him. The Hokage closed his eyes and shook his head, remembering Minato's request. I'll tell him when he makes it. He watched Yugito out of the room and appeared beside Naruto on Yondame's head. Naruto looked up and noticed Yugito beside him after the brief swirl of leaves. Her appearance hadn't changed that much as she was wearing similar clothes as before, but the only difference was that she was wearing a vest and her lower back-length hair was tied in a bandaged sai. He looked back down as Yugito stood beside him. So it seems you didn't stay behind to get your team better. He nodded in agreement as he descended onto Konoha. Yugito sighed deeply and sat down next to him and spoke softly. I know you don't like anyone else, but you should at least give your teammates a chance. Who knows, they could end up becoming your friends and maybe even more later on. Naruto looked up at her before looking back down and closing his eyes. She sighed out loud at him, knowing he wasn't going to say anything. But the look on his face told her that he was considering it. She mentally thanked him before hearing something that made both of them pale. Foo. You know this is quite a romantic spot. Both slowly turned around to see Anko grinning psychotically at them with an aura of malice surrounding her. Naruto paled even further as she gripped both of their shoulders and they found themselves in a very familiar forest. His eyes widened in fear as he knew this wasn't going to end well and was going to try and end this peacefully. Anko ni-chan. Whatever we did, I swear it was all her. Yugito's eyes widened as she turned around and was about to strangle Naruto for stabbing her when Anko laughed at them. Oh, you think this is about something you did? No. Both turned away from each other and looked towards Anko, who was grinning at them manically. Remember I said that when both of you became shinobi I was going to test you. Both of them slowly started backing away, not liking where this was going. Well, let us begin. Sensei Jashu. Her arm thrusted forward as 4 snakes quickly shot out of her sleeve and headed towards them. On instinct they both jumped and rolled out of the way. Naruto quickly unsheathed his katana as Yugito pulled out a kunai in defense. Anko smirked devilishly at both of them before slowly melting into mud. Naruto searched his surroundings, trying to find Anko. Hearing a light rumble with his enhanced hearing, he jumped into the air as Anko shot out the ground, only to be forced to dodge a kunai from Yugito. She skidded back before rushing, pulling out a few kunai and throwing them at an airborne Naruto before rushing towards Yugito. Quickly countering the kunai with his own, Naruto landed on a tree before jumping off as a large snake crushed the tree. Damn it. She had to summon it, didn't she? Anko smirked as she blocked and traded blows with Yugito. She knew she could beat her into jutsu and ninjutsu as long as she could keep Naruto at a distance and keep them from working together, otherwise it would be an uphill battle. Yugito knew this as she pulled out a handful of shurikens and threw them at her before jumping back and going through the hand seals to create a few Tsuchi Bunshins, only to find Anko behind her. Nice try squirting, but I know that trick all too well. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed Yugito turn to mud before her eyes widened as she jumped out of the way of her own snake. She looked up to see Naruto had placed one of the seals he had learned from Kakashi on the snake's head, confusing it and making it attack everything. She narrowed her eyes before quickly dispersing it with a burst of chakra, only to have to dodge a flurry of kunai and shuriken from all directions as she was surrounded by the two and their clones. In response, Anko smirked as she melted herself, and both heard they didn't want to hear coming from her. Oten. Doryuden. Both paled and quickly jumped away from their clones as a large earth dragon tore through them and destroyed the mouth of them. Unfortunately, they weren't expecting the second dragon in the shadow of the first. Naruto's eyes widened as it connected to him and rammed him through a tree as Yugito narrowly dodged the third dragon aimed at her. Anko appeared beside her and landed a haymaker into her chest before following up with a knee to her gut. Yugito coughed out in pain but gripped her knee before delivering one of her own, but Anko saw it coming and twisted out of the way and landed a kick to her temple. Yugito skidded back and into a tree before she rolled out of the way of Anko's kunai to her throat. She gritted her teeth and turned back to Anko and pulled out another kunai as her eyes flashed purple for a second before charging Anko a bit more wildly and faster than before. Anko instantly realized that a small portion of Nibi's had entered her system as she began to have difficulty keeping up with Yugito's erratic movements. Seeing that at the rate Yugito was attacking her, one of them was going to get seriously damaged, she jumped out of the way and pulled her arm back once more to use Zenijashu, only to find a katana at her neck and a slightly bloodied Naruto holding it and a kunai at her back. Looking around, she noticed Yugito's seals and her eyes widened as she tried to close her eyes but wasn't fast enough. An Ashibari no jutsu. In an instant, Anko felt her body fall limp as she stared Yugito in the eyes, unable to do anything, as Naruto smirked lightly. "We win, Ni-chan." Pulling his katana and kunai back, Yugito released her, letting Anko free. The said snake sighed lightly at both of them before pouting. "You both got lucky. I had too much fun last night. Foo foo foo." Both shivered at the thought, not wanting to know who it was she was torturing, and shook their heads as all three headed home. Meanwhile, a certain weasel sneezed. Thanks for watching my video, sayonara.